Welcome to a verse by verse study of the book of Revelation. Our main source will probably be this book that can be found here. It's the Download Revelation plus James and Jude, or you can view it directly with its source here. So the introduction is about, 63 pages long, and I wanted to highlight some of the things, just take a few minutes. And then I want to go over, touch on the other things that we might be using. This is just Hebrew and English side by side. And here, this is not going to go very far, but he did find a short fragment of a scroll. So it's helpful to see at least as far as it goes, like a chapter or so. And here is a commentary from a Jewish perspective that we can look at to get some second opinions. And this is just as an additional resource, one in Hebrew, and here is in Hebrew too, because some of these translations will be different. They'll be translating from the translation, like in Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin, to translate it back into Hebrew, because almost all of the original manuscripts were destroyed that were in Hebrew. So like a Revelation would have likely been written in Hebrew. It could have been written in other languages as well. But when it's written like Jews to Jews, they would probably be using that. So here he's saying that the manuscript that they're using was found in a Jewish synagogue in India, and that it was generally neutral or negative comments on the side that other people were responding to it with. But that doesn't mean that, like, they could have been using it as like educational purpose and not believing in Yeshua, but they did not erase instances where the original authors are referring to Yeshua as Messiah. And also, let's see, names like Hashem were written with just the one Hey here. And so in the translation that we'll be seeing, they're correcting it with the full spelling. This would have been typical for Jews who want to be careful that they are not allowed to pronounce the name, so that no one's accidentally doing that. And Yeshu can be very derogatory, like as an acronym to saying like, may his name be wiped out. So they corrected that. But just because this might have just been somebody's dialect, since it's in India, that the origin of the word Yeshu may have just been like a good thing, and that was just the way somebody pronounced it. And so it was written this way, and they're correcting it since we know it to be spelled this way. And people's names, some of these people's names were misspelled. These four names, John's name, Yohanan, and Yaakov, and Yehuda, were misspelled. But I don't think they would purposely be derogatory towards, Jacob or Judah. So this is probably just because it's being translated in a certain dialect, like somebody's language, how they were saying it there. And it's interesting that somewhere in these footnotes, it was saying that Melchizedek, meaning without father or mother, he was not created and does not die, he is still Yeshu. And this was written in the footnote. So this is obviously not derogatory towards Yeshua. And it shows that there was this belief that Melchizedek was like a pre-incarnate appearance of Yehoshua. I'll just read it as Yeshua, as that's like the Aramaic, or it means just salvation. It's like a noun. But I believe that in Hebrew, his actual name is Yehoshua, which means he saves, like Hashem saves, instead of Yeshua is just a noun meaning salvation. But anyway, this was interesting here. King of righteous, without father and without and mother, not created and not dead. Adin, what's that one? He is Yeshu. I don't know that one word there. One very important note is that only the epistles written by Paul were written to Gentiles. All the rest of the disciples continued reaching Jews. It's a misnomer that that the New Testament was written to Gentiles. It's all written to Jews, except that Paul was somebody unique whose ministry was to the Gentiles. So we could think that these other books would naturally have been written in their native language. This footnote says that they've investigated all the other copies of Revelation. I mean, I guess all the other ones that they know of, but they did not find any of them to be linguistically authentic. So they would be speculating that they are a translation of a translation. To show that it's from the original Hebrew, one of the first indications they're finding in verse 1 with the word sedot meaning being used. And the word sod means hidden, and sedot is the plural of hidden, or the word sod could also mean foundation. So it's that hidden meaning, mystical meaning. So here it says the very word from which the title revelation is usually obtained is different in this Hebrew version. So chazon, I think this means vision, which is in the other translations. So it doesn't, I mean, I think this means vision. Maybe it doesn't. And so it gets translated as revelation. But instead, it should be translated as these, the hiddens, the secrets. So the word sedot is used, and so it means confidential counsels or secrets. And so this is important for someone who's trying to find out if this is an original or not. Here are 4 other examples of where you see this word sod. So they're going into this to show that when it gets translated, almost always you lose this play on words where a word can sound the same. For example, almond branch and watching come from the same root word in the Hebrew. So this is an indication that this book is authentic. It is the original copy that you find in Hebrew, and that it was written in Hebrew because they're doing it intentionally, repeating these words so that you get this sod, this hidden meaning. Not just from meaning that it's talking about an almond branch and a watching, but also showing you that these both words are connected because they both, this almond branch has this implying the word watching along with it. So here is the sod, the hidden meaning of the angels to the 7 churches, the sod of Yud-He-Waw-He, and the sod of Babel, or the sod of the woman. And so this meaning of sod will be interwoven throughout the book of Revelation. You'll see this word repeated, but unfortunately, when it gets translated into Greek, the word apocalypsis, meaning appearance or revelation, is only used at one time, so we don't see the connection as easily in a translation. And thus the translations of the translations would translate that Greek word revelation, since it means appearance or revelation, into the Hebrew word the vision, hazon, or it can have a meaning of revelation, and now the meaning of sod has been lost. So we see how in Hebrew a word is used to show that the theme is continuing. And also there's the word play where this word Pesach can be associated with a door or opening or a key. And so here's all the different expansions of that root word. But then when it got translated and then get translated back into Hebrew, instead of Pesach for door, it is rather used as sha'ar, like a gate, or dalas, which would be a door. So it's intentionally in this Hebrew manuscript using like this poetic thing that is pleasing to the ears. So it picks from the words that it could pick. Instead of saying dalas for door, he wants to make it have an internal rhyme to it. So this is another indication that this would be an original manuscript. Before going into the actual document of the Book of Revelation, they wanted to bring out some neat things that you can learn from the original Hebrew manuscript that they found. So while it may seem like a contradiction on the surface between the New Testament and the Old Testament, where Revelation is implying that night no longer exists, when you look closer here at the actual manuscript, it says, "Your gates will be open continually, day and night. They will not be shut, for there will not be night." And so while that seems like a contradiction, the people who translated into Greek omitted the word night, will be open continually day and not be shut, for there will not be night. And so then all the other translators would just follow suit. But this could be saying that there's no darkness, no night in the actual city of Jerusalem, the heavenly city. Night also having that meaning of like darkness where like any kind of concealment where you can't see God would come and then lead to error. So there's not going to be any of that in the city, but outside we know that there's Gentile nations, so it makes sense that like they still need to they have times and seasons and days and years, but in the city it's always like daytime, even though we know that time cycles are going on throughout. Another example along the same theme here is that there will be day and night, but we're not going to need the sun and the moon in the city because the Lamb, Yud-He Vav-He is what it's saying here, is going to be that light. So you're not going to need the light of the sun and the moon here. But we also know that the light of the sun and moon is increased sevenfold. So elsewhere, there is day and night, and the sun and the moon will be shining. Unfortunately, people that maybe weren't as familiar with what it's quoting in the Old Testament tried to fix the text and say that night no longer exists. So that's not true. There's day and night. We just don't need like the light of the physical sun and moon to kind of break down that light of God. but that we be able to handle that direct light of God. The next topic that gets misunderstood in translation deals with the tree of life. So it's taking us back to Genesis 2, verse 9. From the ground, the Adamah, Hashem, God, and he formed all tree. So this word tree, when it's a collective noun. So it appears in the singular and can mean a group of trees. All tree pleasing to behold and good to eat, and tree, the living, plural, the livings, and tree in midst, the garden, and tree, the knowledge of good and evil. So is this all one collective tree? It says and 3 times, so it's in the midst of the garden. It's for eating and beholding, and it's for good and evil. Some people speculate that this tree, like the good and the evil, was like the outside, like a serpent skin, and then it has that inward life or light within it. But the point being that Eitz appears in the singular when it's referring to a collective group of trees. So maybe even all the trees in the garden, these fruit-bearing trees, were the tree of life, and it was multiple. And it's also interesting to note that the word garden is chosen and not the word for orchard. The word gets translated as orchard. Looks like it comes from the word for fruit, and it's just the plural form, paradim, orchard of pomegranates with choice fruits. So the garden was probably have other things besides this collective tree of life. So here you can see how people would be confused that this tree is on both sides of the river and it bears 12 fruits, even though that's not how God designed trees to be, how one tree could bear 12 fruits. And their leaves are for healing of the nations. So to fix this, it would just get mistranslation, or like some people would say that there were 3 trees, or that the tree was split in its middle and the roots went on both sides. All these speculations that it leads to, but if you know that in the Hebrew the word eitz is a collective noun, then it would not be wrong to say that this tree of life is at least 12 different trees, maybe many, like all the fruit-bearing trees that are in the middle here. So each according to their kind. And if it were wood, which is the same word eitz, that's when it would be in the plural. The word for wood, once a tree is cut up, it's eitzim, which is pieces of a tree plural. Ezekiel 47:12. On the banks of the stream were exceedingly many trees on this side and on that side. So I'm not just jumping to the conclusion that the tree of life in the Garden of Eden is all the trees, but that does, with the Hebrew understanding, that makes us need to go back and look at it with the proper eyes. So this verse could more correctly read, and among the plains, even beside the stream, there grew up all kinds of fruit trees on either side of its banks, namely the trees of life. And on them were 12 kinds of fruit, and their fruit was for food, and their leaves for healing. The next topic is Yeshua the Alpha and Omega? And they're saying that in this Hebrew manuscript, Aleph and Omega, Aleph and Tav do not appear Instead, it's saying first and last. And it's showing how the letters Aleph and Tav is a direct object marker. It's fine if you are inspired by some deeper hidden meaning, where Yeshua is like the first and the last as far as the beginning of the letters and the last of the letters. But in this manuscript, it just says first and last. So here is the initials for this manuscript. I am the first and the last, the beginning and the end. It doesn't say Alpha and Omega, just to note. Or I am the first and the last, this manuscript here. I'm the first and the last, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And it's also, this claim is a quote of the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, it doesn't say ever, I am the Aleph and the Tav. It says, I am the first and I'm the last. So he's making this, by making this claim, he is connecting himself with the Father. I am he, I am the first, and also I am the last. Another thing that is unique to this Hebrew manuscript is that the order of the words are different than the Greek. So it's pointing out that in the Masoretic text of the Torah, like Genesis, when the Greeks translate it, they will just swap the word order for no apparent reason. It's fine if it's a grammatical reason, but for just no reason, there are many instances of the word order getting swapped around. Here's some examples. But with the other copies of Hebrew Revelation, when it's translated back from the Greek, they were very careful to not swap the order unless it's a grammatical reason. So that's what's unique about this document, and it gives these many examples whenever it says the name of the city of the New Jerusalem, the city of my Elohim, whereas the Greek would say the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, and then all the other manuscripts would be careful to keep this order when they translate it back into the Hebrew. Another thing you will find in this Hebrew manuscript is gapping, which is something that is typical for a Hebrew speaker or found in the Old Testament. So here's an example of the actual text of the Bible. It says, he said to the woman, but when it got translated into the Greek, with no italics or anything to indicate that they'd done so, just put in the serpent for clarity. But sometimes that ambiguity, I think, in the Hebrew can also lead to a deeper meaning. So yeah, we could know in context that it's talking about he. Would go back and we find the antecedent and see that it's talking about the serpent. But there could be some kind of deeper meaning, and that's why the Bible didn't want to explicitly say the serpent here. So our Revelation example is all of them. It's a pronoun here, but when it gets translated into the Greek, it's specifying the antecedent, all nations. And that clarity is inserted in there because they don't want you to misunderstand. They're always making it easier for the readers that it's not talking about them, the Satans and birds and creeping things. But what about if it says all of them, where you could almost have that hidden meaning, that a deeper teaching, that these nations have become so full of darkness, it's like they're possessed, that God's not in them, and it's almost like they're the ones that are going to wander this barren land now, or whatever it is, that it's now become, I think this is like Jerusalem becomes, or where this woman sits, we'll get to there, has become a type of Babylon. This Babylon and Jerusalem can be somewhat synonymous here. So she is kind of sitting there, but we'll get there anyway. That it's like these nations, they're so closely tied. It's like the devil and all those who bear his mark. They're all these ones that get cast into this Gehenna place. So there could be just a tie where it could refer to either, and that's why there's that ambiguity. And so the translators shouldn't clarify it for us. They should leave it there so that we have to use our brains and think for ourselves what's the deeper hidden meaning. Here's another example, except now we're looking at the object that was gapped, so it's just a pronoun. So it just says among them, and it's clarified here that it's among the 7 candlesticks. And here it is, do not be afraid of them. But the Greek says, do not be afraid of what you're about to suffer, because they assume that's what them was referring to. But it could have also, see, they're putting their commentary in there, thinking that that's what the meaning is. But it could meaning the ones, the people. Don't be afraid of them, the people, instead of them, what you're about to suffer. And here's two things that almost seem to contradict, before him or before the throne. So in Hebrew, it and him are the same word. So it gets translated 2 different ways into the Greek. But in the Hebrew, it probably would have been correctly translated. It should have been translated before him, not before the throne. There's even seems to be a mistranslation, which indicates that Revelation was originally written in Hebrew. So these 2 words, agalim and agalot, calves and chariots, were probably the original Hebrew. And so you can see how this misunderstanding came about, where it's originally says calves and chariots, but then they misunderstand it for horses and calves, and horses and chariots would be because they just didn't see that little difference there. They didn't understand the Hebrew correctly, so they mistranslate it. And then, so this originally says calves, not chariots. It should say horses and calves. But then all the other translations would follow suit and think that it says horses and chariots. And a final note before we begin verse 1 is that the Greek, even in the Old Testament, would translate Yud He Vav He as Theos, meaning God. But when translated back into the Hebrew, you're not going to translate the word for God as Hashem Yud He Vav He. So in this unique manuscript, what they did for where Hashem appears is they would just put a He, like a H, with dots over it, and that stands for the H, as in Hashem, the name, which indicates that they're talking about Yud He Vav He. So here's the actual manuscript, and it says this He, that means the, for the name. And so they would know it's not talking about God, the title God. It's talking about Hashem, Yud He Vav He. So here's examples, but in the that's for the Old Testament. And in here we see where it says Hey like this, that it is definitely talking about Hashem, but the Greek just puts Theos. So that concludes it for our introduction. And so I welcome you to join me as we delve now into this actual Hebrew manuscript and learn the book of what we once thought was Revelation, but this book of hidden secrets of Messiah, verse by verse.